Okay. So this is the first meeting of handover of auto deploy between the configure team and the release team, progressive delivery team. And the idea behind it is that deployment is a large part of what we're doing anyway in the release stage. So it makes sense to build on top of it. And even now, we have a lot of things that we're developing at the moment that use and extend the auto deploy for non-Kubernetes usage, such as deploy to AWS CCS. And I assume additional targets will be joining soon. So it's not necessarily Kubernetes for users that would use this, but it builds on top of it. So that's kind of the motivation for the handover. And I think in terms of DRIs from the development side, we have Etienne on the line and Shinya. I didn't see him join, but probably the both of them will be responsible for auto deploy from the release side. And that's kind of like an intro to what we're doing. I assume this is not going to be our last conversation on this topic, which is the first. So I tried to jot down like some topics that we can discuss, but of course this is not my meeting, it's yours. So feel free to change and add and remove stuff. But things that I thought that we need to discuss was auto deploy, technical overview, like what's going on in there just in general, so that we get a better understanding of how it works in the Kubernetes side. Some technical issue lists, so things that are upcoming or are currently in work or need refactoring so that we're aware of what's going on. Talk about auto DevOps documentation. And when I said this, so there's an idea rolling around about composable auto DevOps, which basically means that you can mix and match whatever you want from auto DevOps pipeline. So you can do your own build stage, but then take advantage of everything else, or just select any stage and like Legos build whatever you want. So that's kind of a discussion of where we would want the documentation to land. Also, in terms of the features page, so there's a features YAML file that we have on gitlab.com. And we need to decide how we're going to separate that and who owns what. I put here a question mark about auto review apps because it's something that was on a thread in Slack, but we didn't actually make any decision. So I put that still as a question mark. Since we're the team that manages review apps anyway, it does make some sense, but it's not a decision that we need to do now. I just want to focus on auto deploy for the moment. And then I see Nicholas added some technical roadmaps that need to be coordinated, and configure can be the maintainers to help onboard. So I think this is going to be a dynamic list that we can, change even during our conversation, but that's kind of what I would like to walk through. So let's get started with a technical overview where I can shut up.
Yeah, I guess, Hoarder, do you want to kind of just kick it off and maybe explain how like auto DevOps deploy works? And I guess maybe talk a little bit about, I guess, whether or not, just like how it's been structured so far, how it relates to like Kubernetes specifically, and how it might be good to restructure it if we want to have this kind of multiple deploy targets angle to it.
All right. So, sorry, I'm still going through my first coffee of the day. So, auto DevOps technical overview. So I think that they know the gist of it already, but the things that we have been responsible for have been auto build, auto deploy, and auto test. And the main, I believe the main template. So these these are the things that we have been responsible for within the configure team. And let's just go with that. Auto DevOps is a set of CI templates that take care of the most common, or like take care of, yeah, we all know this. So
Yeah, I mean, like I can take notes if you just want to chat.
yeah, I'm just trying to structure my own thoughts for this as well. So these are the projects that we have been primarily responsible for. So maybe I should share my screen for this. I just have so much open at the moment. So there's this auto build image. This one uses Heroku build packs to automatically build, to automatically detect the project type and do the to build your container image that will get deployed. And it also gives the user opt out of the build pack detection because it is quite fallible, and it's also kind of like the Heroku build packs are quite slow, and they can use Docker files. Then there is auto test. This is just a tiny script, Heroku-ish build pack test, and it needs to be replaced because Heroku-ish is deprecated. It's deprecated upstream. So this is like one of the, this is a significant piece of like engineering upstream that we do not have on a currently alternative for. That kind of is on the roadmap to figure something out for. And then auto deploy, this is primarily auto deploy image and the template to a lesser extent. No, I copied the wrong one. Oh, and auto deploy app, so let me cancel that. Yeah, so auto deploy image is this. This is basically a CI script that got extracted earlier, like mid last year, from the massive auto DevOps template that we had built up for the sake of testability. So we have, sorry, I clicked something. So this is the main script that used to live inside one auto DevOps.gitlab CI.yaml file that has, in the past course of the last year, been broken up into subtemplates and Docker images for testability. So that's how all of these sub-projects actually got created. And it's just like a massive script that basically just calls Helm. Well, massive, it's not even that massive. It's less than 500 lines. And then there's this Helm chart. Well, we have the links here actually too. And this is the chart that's being deployed by the auto deploy image. And it's like hyper customizable, and users always want more customization. Currently, we are wrapping up Kubernetes. Like it's super simple. It's like really doesn't really have a lot because the kind of type of application that we deploy is really, really simple. So like these are just like very, very basic things in here, like this is a very short deployment definition if you look at it, but then you look at all the ifs here, you see that it has a lot of like what you call cyclomatic complexity. There's like so many different configurations that you could activate. So like a lot of our more advanced users will have, like, pretty much none of them will have effectively the same deployment type due to this. And this has been one of the more interesting, like probably one of the most active projects for community contributors is just adding, like for our team is just people wanting to add more configuration to this template. And that's actually something that kind of, I would say would be a very, like, for the future, it would be nice to have something more customizable than Helm backing this, because Helm is a kind of a, like you have to configure it by passing down flags, but then what ends up happening is that you create something like a DSL on top of Kubernetes that is less flexible than Kubernetes, and yet like it's very hard to support. And yeah, we are just wrapping up currently for like Kubernetes 1.16 support for this chart, and this was a challenge because it uses, it was especially a challenge because the chart uses a floating version. It's deployed using, like, we don't hard code the version of the chart, and this means that every time we make a change to the chart, it just goes out to all users, even users on older GitLabs. And we had already changed this for the other projects we use, like auto build image and auto deploy image. And this is the last one that still remains on a floating version. And it's just very hard to iterate on projects that use floating versions, because you can't make like any kind of breaking changes. Even if they wouldn't be breaking for users, that the user that you really want to get the changes, they would break something for users that don't actually want to get the changes. This is.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah. Oh, hey.
So we have a couple of templates in this chart folder, right? Chart project.
Yes.
And then we cannot make it's hard to introduce a change because some users already depending on the current structure.
Exactly.
Right? And does it make sense to create a, like, you know, the other template project and then like switch to the like a new chart project if like a specific variable is passed? You know, like just leaving this auto deploy app project as is for like the legacy users. But if, you know, we want to introduce more changes in the future, and in that case, we should maybe, it's hard to, you know, make it backward compatible. So just like abandon the current project and then create a new project. And does it make sense?
Yeah, to me that makes perfect sense. We floated this idea several times already. That like it seems like every time we want to make a change, it's like, how can we ever do it to this template? And we've been doing it so far by masking it behind options, but that just adds more complexity to the template. So yeah, I think once, like, it totally makes sense to do this. And my only reservation for just jumping on it is that you don't want to repeat the same thing with that template and then have to do that again with that template, because then you'll just have two templates that you have to support, you know, for a while.
Yeah.
So yeah, figuring out how to do it in a more sustainable way would be,
yeah, it makes
like
sense.
a prerequisite for me to switch templates, unless there's like a huge important thing that we just have to ship anyway. And we like,
yeah,
like for example, if it's like Kubernetes 1.16 would just not be possible without breaking, like switching the templates, then we would do that. But if we're able to manage with this templates, then yeah. So something
I
like,
have a question. It may be silly.
no, go for it.
But is there a reason why we're not managing this with versions like we do with other like Docker images?
It's just that, like, I think it's just that we didn't think of it in the beginning, or we wanted to iterate really fast. So actually, I think Shinya knows better because he was on the team when that decision was made. But I'm pretty sure this was just like it all started out as a humongous GitLab CI template that was Auto DevOps, right? And they were all, and then they were all in the same repository or something. I've done some archaeology here, and then all of these things got iteratively split out. So this current structure is a good example of like iterative improvements, I think. And we just haven't done the versioning yet. So what we like, it should be pretty easy to introduce versioning by hard coding the version of this template that should be paired with auto deploy image into auto deploy image, and that would solve some of the problems. But it would still not solve the problem for users who have not like upgraded into that version of auto deploy image that pins the version. So we would have to stop overriding this chart at some point.
So another question that I have that's like semi-connected to this is, so when we're doing this deployment to ECS, which we have planned for this milestone, one of the things that we wanted to do was kind of introduce a new like section to auto deploy, that we have a template on the side that does the deploy to ECS, and the auto deploy template would call this I don't know, let's just call it template again, deploy to ECS template as an include.
Yeah.
And since we're planning on like a bunch of targets, so ECS is one of them, but EC2, S3, Fairgate, the AWS ones, we'll probably do the others for additional cloud providers. So we're going to have a bunch of different deployment targets that we can have. Kubernetes isn't one of them. And the way that we thought to do it was to take out the Kubernetes section from the auto deploy and also make it like an external template, just like you did here, where you pulled it out from the massive auto DevOps. So just call it as an include and try and hope that nothing is harmed from taking it out, which of course needs testing. But then if we do that, that would already let us have an opportunity to introduce a new version. Am I wrong in the way that I'm thinking?
So, I mean, I like the splitting. Like, I think it makes sense to split like by deployment type in the so the original plan. Like I've been reviewing that work actually and following along. So the whole original plan does make sense. Like one thing that was unfortunate was that we were already planning things that would make it complicated. So we just landed the breaking changes that would have made it complicated to kind of roll both things out concurrently, like that split. But so the main thing that I've had for that one was that so it's more of a long-term concern, which is that we have, so there are these two sections here, operations environments, which is actually called deploy boards, and then operations Kubernetes, which I would probably more generally called deployment platforms, but they're called the Kubernetes section and the deploy board section. And so here we have like these advanced integrations that like this is where we allow users to do things like target clusters by environment and to target, and here it's the deploy boards is, you know, you see a list here of deployments, and I mean, I don't have, I deleted this cluster, so nothing's gonna show up here, but it calls out to the cluster and does stuff. So like adding support for this, like my question was just, was there a plan to introduce stuff like this for the new deployment platforms, or were we planning on kind of more doubling down on the CI variable way of configuring them?
So I hope I understood your question correctly. We have a bunch of stuff that we plan for the deploy boards, but for deployment to AWS, I didn't see anything specific that we wanted to add here. What we were relying on was the environment variables that were configured, and that's pretty much how we figured out that a user is applying to AWS. But there's like a bunch of other ways that aren't covered by this use case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I was just thinking, like for that one was if you wanted to make API calls out to the deployment platform, then this would require the ability to, well, to fetch those secret from the backend and make some sort of. So in here, because here you would see pod rollout statuses and then some other things.
Yeah. Would the CI variables be sufficient to be able to do that, Hoarder, or do you think that it would need to go in the database?
Yeah, so the CI variables would in principle be sufficient for the current deployment, but then anytime the user changes the CI variables, for example, if they want to retarget their deployment to review apps, then they would break deploy boards for the active one. So that was kind of like it's a concern that doesn't surface immediately, but would hit you kind of later on. And this is, I believe this is why the clusters became a separate thing instead of just CI variables, but Shinya probably knows more background on that.
In any case,
I have nothing to add. Sorry. Yeah, please go on.
I was just going to say that for the first iteration, actually for the next few iterations that we're looking at, we kind of try to avoid a collision. So you're either using Auto DevOps Kubernetes or you're using Auto DevOps ECS. If you're using Kubernetes plus ECS, it's just going to initiate the regular Auto DevOps flow for Kubernetes. So at the moment, we shouldn't see any problems in that sense, but at some point we'll probably need to combine them.
Yeah. So coming back to your original question related to like if your plan made sense, I think it like everything makes sense. I'm just like the only thing, like only concerns I had was making sure that the long-term viability of the changes was being considered. And for example, if we decide to use the review ECS suffix or like the ECS suffix for all the deployment jobs, just know that like once the template is landed, users are also going to start including the template, and then any rename or whatever is a breaking change. And this is what we're struggling with currently with the templates we wanted to change from like the only accept syntax to rules, which should be a trivial change, especially to Auto DevOps. But then we realize people are including it, and the only accept syntax is incompatible. So it had to be done at a major milestone. So just like, yeah, little things like that actually turn out to be big things.
Just about this point here, sorry, I'm jumping in. I think I need to review that one more time, but I think the solution of child pipeline and the way that trigger attribute works, that might solve this problem, because you're creating a job. It's not necessarily tied to like whatever template you're using. You can inject the template at some point or use another template to inject for that one job. You see what I mean? There is like a separation of job by stream and name of the template.
I actually thought the child templates were a really cool idea. I like the child pipelines, and I think for Auto DevOps to make it less customizable and from the user perspective, because the user would not be, as far as I can tell, they would not be able to override every single line of the CI job in a child pipeline. I think that would make it a lot easier to manage Auto DevOps.
I think it definitely gives, again, to be confirmed, I need to reread about it, but I feel like it gives a more granular control over certain bits of the pipeline, of the overall pipeline.
Yeah, so I think it gives us more control to, like, say you have an ECS deployment and this is how it works. And then you can only configure it using CI variables. Versus now, well, or you could include the template that yourself that is, extended yourself. So include the ECS deployment template yourself, not as a child pipeline.
Just a quick question. Is there any data point that which one is majority? Like user tended to use variable and without introducing a new GitLab CI YAML, or they want to create a new GitLab CI YAML and manually include the templates?
At the moment, we only have monitoring on the implicit auto DevOps, unfortunately. We added this, this was added like last year, and we never really extended it to the included ones because the primary goal of this was to just notice when there were problems, like big bugs in the pipelines. So here you see, like here, the last one is total auto DevOps pipelines over, like implicitly only auto DevOps pipelines per 12 hours over the last 30 days. So you see that we run about 1,000 pipelines every 12 hours, or between 500 and 1,000. And then you see that actually like a large majority of them fail. Like over 50% of them actually fail all the time, which makes sense because they run on merge requests, and like build, like tests are expected to fail when you're developing. And so that's why we have this dashboard, which shows you like the deviance and success ratios. Anyway, so we only have, like, this is all we know. We can also get the same information, like this information from the database, like from the pipelines table. But the way that CIML works, like the way it's stored, I don't think that we store the information that template has been included in any of the final data structures. So you'd have to hook the monitoring up during the parsing, which is, we just haven't taken the time to do that, but that would be very useful actually to know.
Yeah, it's parsed in CI builds table, the all attributes, but I think it's hard to research all records given the tons of records.
Yeah, is like, this is just a question now. Is the includes thing, is that part of the build? Because I feel like this would be part of the pipeline. Like this is a pipeline level thing, and that I think that what's persisted in the attributes is the final
Maybe
outcome.
you're right. Yeah.
When I looked at it, I couldn't find any includes. I was trying to find them like a month ago.
All right. So, so I think I've answered the question to the best of my abilities. Like overall, the plan does, like, it does make sense. Just wanted to make sure that we weren't repeating some of the things that we had been working hard to, kind of hard to the floating version is something that really was a big pain point for us. So making sure we don't have a floating version in something that we're just adding, and making sure that if we introduce a new name to the template that the user can extend, that this is the name that we want to be using for the long run. Like simple things like that like turn out, like they seem like very small concerns right now, but then when you want to change them, they're really, really annoying.
I guess you want to speak to that a little bit, because like we'd had a conversation about how people look at these YAML templates almost as if it's like a public API.
So that's let's look at the Auto DevOps docs. And there's where is this? Here. So this section here about how you can include auto DevOps like this, the result of including auto DevOps like this is that you can really, like here, we even document this kind of behavior. You can override like individual attributes in your job, in every job. So every single thing in the auto DevOps CIML template, from not just us, but from every template that is in here, is basically public API. So this is why just when introducing a new job, actually this is why I like the child pipeline. So, but when you introduce a new job, make sure that it is in even if you're iterating, make sure that the whatever you add is in a way that is forwards compatible, so that you can iterate on it without having to do breaking changes to the template. Does that make sense? And this is what I liked about the child pipelines, is that like it would probably not be as vulnerable to this kind of extension. Well, vulnerable or open to this kind of extension, because the contents of that pipeline are like, I don't even know how they would extend it without like hooking into the generation itself.
Yeah, actually, yeah, it makes sense. That yeah, with parent-child pipeline, users cannot override specific keywords at the specific job.
Yeah.
So like it's specifically for implicit users, implicit usage.
Yeah. So yeah, I really like that one, and I only had like that one minor major concern that just to not use a floating version for that if possible, because it will slow you down for your next iteration. It will let you land it sooner, but it will slow you down when you want to make any changes that require backend work. I'll write that on the merge request as well. All right. So I feel like I've taken up a lot of this time. Do you have any other questions?
I have one question. So if you can scroll up that document here.
Yeah.
The Google Doc. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Yes. So the auto deploy image, the image that orchestrates the deployment. Today, when it comes to AWS and more specifically AWS ECS, we developed our own AWS specific Docker images. So where I don't know much about that auto deploy image that you talked about, you mentioned here, but from a gist of it, I feel like this is an image that's platform agnostic, and on one hand we have this auto deploy image, on the other hand we have these AWS ECS and AWS based images that are very AWS related or focused, and so I need to look into that a little bit more, but wouldn't the goal be to have like a convergence towards like one platform agnostic image, which ultimately would be auto DevOps image? And if that's the case, I'm just wondering what would be the fate of these AWS images?
Yeah, this was a comment that Mark also made on the parent issue, kind of like, it was one of the ways in which we could actually introduce ECS support without even modifying the templates really. Actually, all we would have to do is remove the restriction that the deployment jobs are Kubernetes specific, and just say they have any deployment platform. That just requires us to know that that there is one of these auto deploy supported deployment platforms available. And so, yeah, I think that actually makes a lot of sense. It's one very viable way forward is to extend auto deploy image or build another one that merges both. As for the fate of the ECS images, I don't know. I think it makes sense to, like, also for iteration, to build out the functionality in the ECS image and try to, for example, mimic the API of auto deploy, see if there's any parts where it's Kubernetes specific. Yeah, one thing that you probably will, I don't know if you will be able to have that is the in-cluster database that auto deploy app or image kind of currently provision has been very painful for us actually, because we're not really qualified to be managing people's databases. So we shouldn't be offering that functionality. Like in production, you know, they really should be using a managed service for the databases instead of self-deployed Postgres. But it's there, so we have to deal with it, and it does demo really well. Sorry, that was a tangent. So yeah, I think building it out and in the ECS image while you're still like figuring out all the details makes a lot of sense, and then merging it back into auto deploy image, yeah, should be would be a really cool iteration.
Thank you.
So we discussed a little bit about what we have planned for deploy to ECS and the fact that we're relying at the moment on the environment variables in terms of deciding that that's the target. From a previous conversation that I had with Daniel, I understand that auto DevOps in general also relies on the environment variables. Is that correct?
Yeah. So auto DevOps is like in the end, the whole architecture is there are some extra things on the back end, like kind of a deployment platform support, which then in the end just injects CI variables into the pipelines. So the whole feature is in the end, like, you know, once you get to the CI stage, everything is driven by CI variables. So starting out with CI variables for the first iteration does make a lot of sense. But then, yeah, did that answer the question?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess could you, I guess just explain, I guess are you saying like when it gets started, it uses CI variables, but eventually it makes it into actual like database tables, right? Like separately? Is that
Oh,
true?
so yeah, let's go to this page. So everything that's in here that reaches the, like for the Kubernetes specific integration, everything that's in here in this cluster stuff eventually becomes a CI variable. But for the sake of a more integrated experience for the user, we have this page here. So that's all I'm saying. Like, so that you can do these things, like, you know, that you can tell that the project has Kubernetes, and that, you know, you want to be able to display different things in the UI. Like all of this should be in the database in a way that is meant to be retrieved by the user and to drive backend business logic. But the feature then, like, so this whole, like, this is not a lot of database stuff, and then it drives CI variables.
Okay. While we're still on that page, even though this isn't directly related to ECS, we have another issue regarding implementing load balancers and annotations on NGINX.
Yeah.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about that. What our current plan is to use the already supported NGINX annotations and let users configure it some way through the UI and through API to let them change different parameters like weight and things like that. And then we would want to connect it back to Auto DevOps. I mean, first of all, we would like to let the user do that regardless to Auto DevOps, but then we would tie it back to Auto DevOps.
Yeah.
So that would probably go underneath incremental rollout or timed incremental rollout or Canary or any of those rollouts where you can play around with the weights. And that would probably be something that we would visualize on the deployed boards. Again, I'm not a developer, so I'm going to let Shinya and Etienne take over for my questions. But what I want to point you at is this also something that you see that would be part of the auto deploy template? Do we need to separate it as well? Like, how would we go around to do that?
We actually need to extend the charts. So in this case, auto deploy app. Currently, like there's a say variable called Canary enabled, and if this variable is specified, Canary deployment is created, and the simply put, what do we currently have for Canary deployment and the production deployment is like service level load balancing. And there is one service, there are two deployments. One is Canary and one is production. And then the traffic is routing to these deployments. And actually one contributor was trying to fix this problem because it's kind of bothering to use Canary ingress. So we actually need to a bit of re-architect of the current deployment, like how we deploy resources on Kubernetes. I won't go into the details, like I already described in the essay issue though. Basically, we need a bit of re-architect on the chart project.
Yeah, I've seen the work here. I'm trying to find the issue where they were talking, or I thought they opened the merge request, but I can't find it at the moment where they.
Yeah, that's one. The second one.
It's this one.
Yes.
So. Yes, so they're trying. Yeah, so this is just for context. This is the merge request that allows you to have, what is it? Was it separate load balancers for production and Canary? Or?
Yeah, actually introducing the other Canary ingress service, and then like introduce advanced traffic control between Canary and the production.
Right, and this is the feature you guys wanted to add.
Yes.
The Canary by header here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I think Shinya answered the question.
Okay. Great. So jumping back to ECS, another thing that we're discussing is adding a new parameter or variable that's called launch type. And the idea here is to make it easier on the logic of Auto DevOps. So once we're introducing a bunch of different targets, Auto DevOps needs to differentiate what the target ultimately is going to be, where the deployment is going. So at the moment, we will have two, as opposed to one today, which is Kubernetes. So we'll have Kubernetes and ECS. And as I mentioned, we have a bunch of future plans for additional targets. I know I asked a similar question, but would this help us in terms of extracting the deployment to Kubernetes or deployment to ECS from the main master template? And would this help with the versioning at the end of the day? Because basically, since we're introducing this new variable that doesn't exist in previous versions, it can help us determine what kind of version a user is using.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been thinking about this as well, because honestly, up until this effort to add ECS, we really hadn't thought much about generalizing to different, like what I like to call deployment platforms, because that's an abstraction that's already halfway in the code base. So there are already some abstractions, and like I think launch types for AWS makes a lot of sense. Though I would encourage you to maybe try to see if it makes sense to make the abstraction less AWS specific, because I think you can do that without actually like making it more complicated and possibly just making it simpler. Because in the end, what you want to do is like you want to have some sort of a backend signal that you can use at different stages of the UI to just show a slightly different message. For example, in the Auto Devops UI somewhere, let's see, where do I have the minimal? Here, like instead of showing this Kubernetes menu, you want to show ECS, and in here, like you wanted to show, like in this Auto DevOps here, you wanted to show something ECS instead of Kubernetes. Although this one is really, really completely generic, as long as the platform is one where it makes sense to deploy in these different ways. Like if staging is something that makes sense, or incremental rollout is something that makes sense. I think that probably makes sense for almost every deployment platform possible. So this is pretty generic. But yeah, the launch type makes sense, but I suspect that like I would encourage you to maybe try and do it at the level, like at a slightly more abstract level, and then specialize Kubernetes and AWS for that, because it seems like if you're already planning a third one and a fourth one, that will make things easier, and then you could add something like Heroku.
Yeah, I guess too. I mean, like in terms of the messaging as well, I'm kind of curious about the messaging because, and correct me if I'm wrong, Hoarder, but you know, with Auto DevOps, you're able to deploy Kubernetes to any Kubernetes kind of platform, right? Whether you want to go to EKS or GKE or Azure or something else. And so like you'd have that, and then you'd have ECS, which is very specific. So the specific provider, specific platform. I just wonder about the kind of, and again, if you're planning more, how is that like the messaging element of it, as well as kind of the organization, like the architecture of it? I think that it could be done really well. I was just wondering what the plan is there.
Is this a question for me or for
Orit? For Orit.
Yeah.
So at the moment, it's like something that you add, the user would add manually to like the YAML itself. And then that's how we would make a decision. It's nothing like visual or anything. It's just an environment variable, a new one. Again, the idea behind it was just to make life easier for the logic. You know, it's at the end of the day, when you think about it, it's like a switch case, and we have a bunch of different cases. So this would, you know, the thing that I'm scared most is that there's some kind of deployment target that we haven't thought about, and I don't want to deal with it. So I want to make sure that that gets skipped. And on the other hand, I want to make sure that the other elements of Auto DevOps, if you're not using Auto Deploy, you can still use the other ones downstream or upstream. So you can still use Auto Build, Auto Test, Auto everything else. So that was the reasoning behind it.
Yeah, I think that makes absolute and total sense. I was just wondering if we're gonna, because right now pretty much everything is focused on Kubernetes, like the messaging, documentation, the UI, like everything. So if we're gonna kind of create a new, you know, deployment targets, it does create an opportunity. I feel like it does create a lot of opportunities actually, like you're mentioning. There's an opportunity to maybe break it in a way that we can add version in. there's an opportunity to break it in a way that can add multiple deployment targets. I think it opens a lot of opportunity. I was just wondering if there was kind of a plan around that, or if...
Well, that's why we have Dimitri here too, so he can start thinking about it as well, because it is very Kubernetes targeted right now. And even the idea of the load balancer with the NGINX weights, we don't even know where we want to place it. So, I mean, I was thinking, I don't want to hide it under Kubernetes. I don't, maybe, even though this one is starting from Kubernetes, but like, how do we visualize it? Maybe it's a really good opportunity to change up everything. So I don't know. That's why we had Dimitri.
So I'm just gonna jump in here. This is something that Hodder and I were chatting a little bit about last week. And yes, at the moment we have like that whole framework that's very Kubernetes focused, right? And having a new deployment platform is an opportunity indeed to just maybe add a new layer of abstraction, to do some sort of refactoring, and to make this framework that exists today in our code base less Kubernetes focused, right? And from that point, once we've like updated, improved that framework to be, platform agnostic, then maybe we can move on to like implementing a new UI. And after that, we can even maybe like remove the CI variable. The CI variable, the new CI variable, is like what holds it all together, right? What enables us to have that second platform, right? It's a switch in a way. And so but that should be the case while we are updating, improving, refactoring that framework, that very specific framework. I'm gonna go into details, but that Kubernetes focused framework, if we're like improving it and just making it, so that it fits for ECS, then after that, I think we'll be able to move forward and be able to add more deployment platforms.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds great. And the configure team totally stands ready to help in whatever way we can to help plan or provide consulting to help that along. I think the only thing I'm going to ask is just keep communication open, because somehow we didn't know about this until like last week. So, like the more the communication and transparency is there, the more that we can help make it great and avoid, problems and things like that. So
yeah, totally agree. Like, for example, the work that you guys have done on the implementation of the rules attribute, I think that's great, and that's something that I pulled so that I can work with it onto my tasks, and yeah, I feel like now there's like more and more communication, and it's good and very helpful to have an insight on what you guys have been doing.
Yeah, so we have about 5 minutes left. So what I'd like to do with this time is understand any action items and what's next plan from the handover standpoint.
Actually, can I ask 2 more questions? So like, one is maintainability. There are 2 projects, right? One is chart and one is auto-deploy image. Who is the maintainer currently? And then do you guys expect us to take over the maintainership?
Yeah, so currently, yeah, we actually, I would say 3 projects. I would say auto deploy really heavily depends on the container being built as well. So I would personally, if I was responsible for the whole the auto deploy thing, I would really want to have also actually control over that image. And yeah, so there's auto deploy image, there's auto build image, and auto deploy app, where the configure team maintains all of them. Who on the team is a maintainer depends on kind of what they worked on, but we we're the primary maintainers of it. And yes, I would expect you to take that over if you're taking over the auto deploy feature. And that's what we were expecting and when discussing it.
Okay, so like you said, there are some contributions from external contributors. Is it does it happen often, or is it rare?
Recently, it feels like it's been happening more, which might be a signal that we're getting more users or that people are bored in the pandemic. I think it's just we're getting more users over time, and that people are starting to hit the limitations of like the Helm chart. So I would say we're getting about maybe 1 or 2 significant contributions monthly, but then we also get there's these less significant ones that fall into a gray area of adding complexity to the chart that might not benefit many users, and we're not entirely sure. Like we've been having a harder time reviewing and handling those at the moment because, you know, it's on the one hand it's might be easy to add, but we don't want to keep adding them.
Yeah, makes sense. And one more question is that you show me the like metrics dashboard that like pipeline success rate for implicit DevOps usage, right? Is there any other like metrics dashboard that we should be aware of?
Wait, hold on. Sorry, it was my partner looking for her computer. Yeah, so the dashboard that, let me link these in the doc. So,
yeah, you can do that later. So
okay.
Just, yeah.
So no, the 2 dashboards that I've showed you, so this is the main metric. This is just Thanos Prometheus interface. And these are the main 2 live monitoring dashboards that we have. Oh yeah, I'm not sharing my screen. So, but yeah, no. So the dashboards that I showed you is the only dashboard that we have for monitoring for errors. We don't really look at it that much because like it's pretty stable. So it's more of a reactive thing that we look at it when people start complaining. But previously, so they got added previously because we had the problem that you know, auto DevOps broke and we didn't know, and we had no way of really verifying it because it was semi-random. So then we added those dashboards. We wanted to add them to the, like, integrate them more with the service monitoring framework of GitLab, but that work just kind of well, it's on me, and I just haven't finished it. And this is something that would be nice to do.
Yeah, thanks. Makes sense.
You're muted.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat the question. What are our immediate action items in terms of the release team?
Sorry, I muted my sound. I didn't hear the last 2 things that were said.
So Aura just was asking how like what should be our next action items for this. Well, I mean, it seems like we're going to need another meeting potentially, so we should probably set that up. I'm wondering if there's folks on the progressive delivery team that want to join these projects as trainee maintainers. We could sort of kickstart that process of getting them bumped up towards being a maintainer. Then they can start to see the external contributions that come in, as well as review the MRs that we create, vice versa. These are just ideas. I'm not trying to dictate here. And then I feel like we have these 2 MRs currently that are being reviewed. The only accept rules MR, which I believe is going to get merged first, correct?
It's merged.
It is merged.
That was merged last night by Tom. So
Okay.
that is merged. Then the other one is moving the Postgres default version, which we are doing. Like it should be merged very soon. So hopefully today or tomorrow. And then those are kind of the main action items we have for 13.0. My suggested plan would be that configure, identify the kind of work that we want to wrap up now during the handover stage, and that their team kind of help review that work, and that we pause any further feature development. So we just wrap up the maintenance tasks and then like try to hand things over as nice as possible to them.
Well, that, and I'm wondering if, like, do we maybe either create an additional Slack channel or some way that we can coordinate, you know, this is what we were thinking, so that if we do want to do continued development, that there's a kind of a, you know, ability to collaborate and really be transparent about what's going on. Slack channel, or maybe a asynchronous meetup or something.
Yeah, should there be a feature channel maybe? Like we have feature for container registry and other things. So maybe there should be a feature auto DevOps channel.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, great. So I'll schedule another meeting. Do we think like what kind of cadence do we need to like learn and get back here in another week or in 2 weeks? What does the team feel like?
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my perspective, I feel like, you know, if we met next week, like my team can come up with a list of like handover items of, like, now that we have a better idea of kind of the overall situation, come up with a specific list of things that need to be handed over. We can communicate in this feature channel. Then maybe we don't need to meet regularly, because I don't think any of us need any more meetings, but I guess maybe we could decide at the next meeting, like what we want to do. Does that work? Okay.
Yeah. Cool. So thank you everyone for joining. And I'll post this recording to the ops group stage so everyone can get a chance to see it.
Great, thank you. It was nice meeting everyone.
Bye.